We would like to welcome everybody to our talk today at our virtual EDUCAUSE conference. Chris, it's really good to see you today, even though we have been COVID tested and we are sitting more than 6 feet away. It's still really good to share some space with you.
It is. It's exciting to be here and present what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, I'm pretty excited. So who are we? I am Dr. April Fugett. I have a PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of Kansas, and I am the Academic Affairs Faculty Fellow and Liaison to Institutional Research. I'm also the Assistant Director for the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm a professor in the psychology department here at Marshall. But enough about me. Chris.
In other words, she's the person that if we need some information, some data, we're just going to find April and come, and she can help us with that, which is absolutely amazing. But my name is Chris Atkins. I am the Associate Director of Advising Technologies here at Marshall. And so a lot of what I do is have ideas, take them to April, see if she can give me some data or some support to what I'm thinking. Am I right? Am I wrong? And then we team up and work together.
So I think that the best place to start is with where we started from. A few years ago, our Academic Affairs Division came to me and said, is there a way that we could identify students who are at risk? And we defined at that point at risk in several different ways. At risk in terms of not being retained, fall to spring retention as well as fall to fall retention for first-time freshmen. We defined it as low GPA, so suspension, probation students. I was tasked with coming up with this predictive analytics model. And I looked at a series of analyses across this risk analytics model, and what I really kept coming back to was two key components. One, risk is different for every student at every university. So what risk or risky or no risk looks like here at Marshall might look very different than what risk might look at your own institutions. And so that's my first piece of advice to you, is to figure out where you want to start in terms of your risk analysis program. For us, we started with what we had. So high school GPA, we had ACT scores. SAT scores for some students, which has actually been shifting in the last couple of years for our incoming freshmen. We had addresses, we had commuter status, we had first generation information. Lots of the kind of typical components that we think about with our incoming students. Now, we also had, kind of by accident, no one really knew where this survey kind of had originated from, but we had been giving a survey for a number of years to our incoming freshmen, and it actually asked a lot of non-cognitive information, so non-cognitive factors. And so I added that into our model and came up with a specific predictive model. Now, I'm going to point out that this model is definitely specific to Marshall, and it is very different for different schools. Those negative student factors, I derived this model through structural equation modeling, and so I did a factor analysis to group all of the questions that we had on these survey items, and then we've tested those survey items. We're on our 4th iteration of those survey items at this point, and these are the kind of categories that they broke down into, what we call the negative student factors and what we call student family resources or pressures on our students. And those directly impacted GPA, but they aren't factors that necessarily impact just college GPA. They are static factors that also impacted high school GPA. And we did use high school GPA as our main predictor for our first semester cumulative GPA. Now, why did we do that? One, high school GPA was the best predictor of first semester cumulative GPA. First semester cumulative GPA was our best predictor and earliest predictor, and that's the key. It was the earliest predictor that we could have for student success, which meant that we didn't have to wait until our census data in October for the following year to intervene with a student. By making that first semester fall cumulative GPA the first touch point that we could really begin to analyze, what we were able to do was to intervene with our students at the latest in January or February of their first year. And we have relatively robust fall to spring retention. So this intervention point was a good intervention point for us. And I'm going to say at the time, because we've actually switched this up already this year because of COVID-19. So we have one really good year of data for this specific model, but it does actually change from year to year and from cohort to cohort, which I think is a really nice component. This is a living model. So I think it's important to give you an idea about what our fall 2019 cohort looked like so that you can make comparisons to your own university. And again here, I really want to emphasize the fact that your university, your college might not look like ours, and that's completely okay. That's why I think it's really important for you to use those same kinds of analyses. But about 65% of our students have at least a part-time job. About 73% say that they need to be employed to be able to pay expenses directly. So we do have a discrepancy there between the number of students who say they need to be employed and who actually are. And like I said, this is the fall 2019 cohort. We have about 37% who indicated that they're likely to seek counseling in some way, shape, or form. We have about 70% who are likely to seek tutoring, and about 32% have indicated that they have distracting or troubling financial problems. And so that's a really key piece of information about our students before COVID was actually even happening, because we know students who are having distracting or troubling financial problems, or who can't afford to pay for things like textbooks, which is another program that Chris has worked on here at Marshall for the last few years. We know those students are less likely to be retained and less likely to be able to be successful in completing their degrees. So one of our measures is negative student factors. That's just what we call the scale. There are 15 items on this subscale. If anybody's interested in looking at the specific questions, please feel free to let either myself or Chris know. Like I said, our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. But basically, higher scores on this subscale means that a student is likely to face more risk. Think of risk as taking away from GPA, and think of taking away GPA as lower likelihood of success, and whether we're talking about graduation or completion or fall to spring or fall to fall retention, those kinds of things. This one I've already kind of alluded to a couple times, those student family pressures. That's, do you have to provide for a family member, a sibling, or a parent, or a child, that kind of thing. And higher scores on this subscale also means more risk. It is weighted more in the model, the actual numbers are, than the NSF component is. So student family resources is actually our second biggest contributor to our model in terms of risk. So we know that it is really, really important. So what were the results? Now, I'm gonna, before I get really excited about this, I'm actually gonna give the results to Chris, which he doesn't know that I was gonna let him talk about it. But it's actually his fault that we got data so quickly. And so I'm gonna let him talk to you a little bit about Navigate and about how I first got this set of numbers to go ahead and analyze.
So we use a advising platform on Marshall's campus called Navigate. It's an educational advisory board platform. And one of the tricks that we have when it comes to Navigate is that we can apply a student tag on a student's profile. So we went ahead and tagged our students as low, medium, and high, not using that terminology, but we were able to tag it. That gives us an easy way to search all of these students. And so right before Christmas break last year, I was able to just search by tag and then compile that data or those groups of students and send those on to Dr. Fugett.
Yep, and so this is kind of what we saw. Our low-risk students had a GPA of about 3.4. Our medium-risk students had an average GPA of about 3.0, and our high-risk students had a GPA of about 2.46. So there's some big differences. We were a little shocked. Chris and I were both like, are we sure this is right? Because we did have them completely coded. We don't tell students that they're high, medium, or low risk because it really doesn't it doesn't really impact them in any way. A lot of the things that would make someone maybe a medium risk is something they can't control over. And so we never want to make a student feel negative or bad about it or anything. So they are completely coded, again, all according to our Office of Research Integrity rules. And so we got this, and I was a little stunned. And then we got the number of hours completed, and our low risk students were completing on average 30.17. You're going to look at me, you're going to say, April, how are they completing 30 hours if they are first time freshmen? And all of these students in this data point are first time freshmen, because we have dual enrollment here at Marshall. And so a lot of these students came in with college credit already, either from the summer or from high school credit or from AP credit, those different kinds of things. And so what we actually saw was pretty significant differences between our groups in terms of hours completed as well. So this is a vast oversimplification of our results, but I think that it's an important takeaway. So the correlation between high school GPA and first term GPA is not significant. Now, I told you in our very first slide together that in the model, high school GPA is one of our biggest predictors of first term GPA, and it is. It's just on its own, it doesn't do a whole lot. It really needs to be used in other ways and in other combinations. But it is the best in terms of a sole predictor. The correlation between our estimated standardized predictor risk score and first term GPA was also not significant, although it was better than the score of just the high school GPA. Now, what that means is that if I looked at all of the students and I had about 25% of their scores, and I estimated the other 75% of their scores for this risk score. When I did that, the correlation between those two was about 0.022. So even when I guessed at students' predicted scores and didn't actually have their specific data, it was better than high school GPA alone, which is what got us a lot of the way there to those differences between groups. So our best predictor was high school GPA, and me having some data for a cohort allowed me to better predict the entire cohort. But that's only part of the story, because if I took out and I just analyzed the students who had completed the survey, now I know that I'm going to get questions via email about, but the students who completed the survey were more likely to be the type of student who would complete a survey. That is absolutely true. There are definitely selection bias going on with that group, which is why I've analyzed all of these separately so that you can get a good idea of what those individual groups look like. But I can tell you that that the individuals who did complete the survey, there weren't any significant differences from what they came in with. We told them in orientation, please do this survey, and people from every group did the survey. And so, yes, there is selection bias. I'm aware of that, but that's not the only thing going on here. But when you take that and take a look at it, the correlation there is about 0.427, which is huge. That means the students that we had the data for, we had a really good idea whether they were medium, high, or low risk. We had a pretty good idea of where they needed to be, which is phenomenal. And then the correlation between our predicted risk score and first term GPA was even higher than that. And I know that I'm going to get questions about what's the difference between the standardized predicted risk score and the predicted risk score. So I use standardized beta weights in my regressions and SPSS for the analyses that you see kind of in the middle up there. And I did that because I knew that we had biased estimators, and I know that we had some selection components there. And I also knew that there were some big differences in terms of weighting for our different subcomponents. For example, I told you that student family pressures was more important in terms of the model for weighting than negative student factors. And so I use standardized beta weights to do that first set of predictions just to get an idea. If I didn't do that, if I used the full regression model and if I ran it completely flat out, our estimate is really 0.507 as a correlation. Now, again, correlation with ACT, we don't use ACT, and we get a lot of questions about why we don't use ACT. And so you can see, even if we had on here that our predicted scores, whether we're using the conservative measure or the less conservative measure, both of those are actually more predictive than ACT and everything that ACT encompasses, which is not a good predictor of first semester GPA for us. So even though that correlation looks like it's there, there's actually other things that are going on.
And so as we talk about how we're going to track the student risk, we used EAB's Navigate because that's the platform that we use. But I do want to touch on the tech side of it. This could be an identifier in your SIS. We could have attached this as a student attribute in Banner. We could have attached it multiple different places. I'm just the Navigate application administrator, and so for me, Navigate was my first go-to. And so there's a great quote by Albert Einstein, and this is what the weight that I really felt. A little knowledge is dangerous thing, so is a lot. And so now all of a sudden we have this knowledge. We can identify where students fall in risk. And so as we slide on here, we're going to get into kind of empowering conversations. And so we were able to see how students really identified with campus, the fact that they needed that connection with their faculty and with the staff and with their advisors. And so one of the things is we just took some of this information that we now had and really tried to work on building those campus connections, build those relationships. That's what the students were searching for. That's what the students really wanted to see when they got here on campus. And so that was one of our major steps, was let's work on building these connections. Building the connections also with some of those other offices that provide services, but they're really reliant on those frontline advisors or those frontline faculty members to say, hey, this student might be a really good fit for the Office of Career Education and working on majors. We don't need to now wait until we see those first test results, but we now have a better idea early on of, yeah, this might be a good connection for them to have. We have this information. What in the world are we going to do with it? One of the avenues that we went with was progress reports. We know that having information early on in the semester is where we can have real impactful change. So EAB's Navigate platform provides us with progress reports. So we decided this year we were going to go ahead and send out these progress reports asking for faculty feedback. Triggering alerts on different issues could be a referral to counseling. We know that our students' anxiety is a real issue and one of the reasons that they might drop a class, yet we also know how few students would go and seek that on their own. And so a referral to counseling is one of the options. That goes right to our counseling office if a faculty member says this student might benefit from that. And then the counseling office reaches out. So again, it's building those connections. If the student's not going to be the one to reach out, the counseling center can be the one to reach out to the student. So we're trying to flip the typical model that a lot of college campuses face and trying just to see what we can do in those realms. We also have personal and family hardships. Knowing the information that we learned about those family issues that those students have and the fact that that can lead to them withdrawing from classes, we wanted to try to identify those earlier. Part of this is now we know the data side of it. Now it's the issue of what can we do on the front lines with the faculty, with the advisors, to really work together and team up and let the students feel we have a real big thing at Marshall is be part of the Marshall family. We're Appalachian. We have a real family importance here. And so that's one of the main factors that we wanted to get to. Now, I have ethical implications here. I considered, do we just do these progress reports for our high-risk students? These are the students that we know are going to be the ones that don't complete as many courses, that typically aren't going to have the high GPAs. we now could segregate out specific bands, maybe just the middle and high students, and ask for feedback on them. That's going to lower the workload request of the Aprils on our campus who are going to receive progress report requests from me. Instead of asking for all students, maybe we just select the high risk and middle risk. We opted out of that. We actually did it for all of our undergraduate students, but I'll tell you, when you get the information that April gives you, and if you can implement something like this on your own campus, be prepared for some of those dilemmas in terms of, geez, what do we do? Do we target everybody? Do we target a smaller population, one of the smaller bands, and really work through some of that information? And April and I talk usually a couple times a week when time allows about a lot of these ethical issues. And so just be prepared for some of those conversations. Have that sounding board that you can talk to in terms of just working through some of this information as you start down these intervention strategy roads.
I think it's another good thing to point out too that nothing is done in isolation. And so even though Chris is pulling a lot of our data from the Navigate app, I have to marry a lot of that data with institutional research data from our kind of program of choice, I guess. Choice is not a good word, but we're a Banner school. And so a lot of times I do have to pull data directly from Banner and marry it with the stuff that we're doing in some of the other programs. And so you do have to be cautious with that when you are looking at those things. And a lot of times that requires me to double or to triple check a different component. So is this really a first-time freshman, or is this a different category student, and that kind of thing.
So then as we talk about kind of that expansion, so we already talked about what we did with orientation. Now instead of, hey, you're here, fill out this survey, COVID happened, and so we've built it on the front end. Now the last question of this survey is, what date would you like to come to orientation? The students just see it as a step of the registration for orientation process. It's part of our admissions process, basically. Student gets admitted to the university. The next thing they do is they go to the orientation website to select their date. When they go to the orientation website, what they get is the link to the survey where they can select the date. And so I would encourage you, consider how you can embed your surveys, your information that you're gathering into processes that already exist. This was a pretty simple one, very limited pushback from the orientation office because we were able to say, here's the information that we've uncovered through this. Can we use your process? And of course, now that we have that, and April already talked about how that flips some of that information, that we now have more data, we're excited to see where it goes. We've also talked about branching out into a sophomore survey. One of my big questions as an advisor is, so the student was high risk, but we retain the student, what are they now? And can we identify any of those key factors with that high risk student that allowed us to retain them? So talking about branching it out, and maybe we can get a 19 Buffalo turning into a 20, our main colors are green, black, and white. So maybe the student is a 20 white to go with the 19 Buffalo. And really kind of track that student's progress through their time on campus. And then April has also talked about that intervention class where we could work together as advisors and faculty. It makes it a little easier since she's a psychology professor and I'm an advisor that we would automatically go to this model of how can we work together for this. But also something like a modified class schedule. It's just as an advisor having the information, we can then place the students, we build our orientation schedules for our first-time freshman students. So we can make some changes to a basic schedule that we would for our typical freshman without that student even knowing it, to try to provide some additional supports for the students as they go. The opportunities are really endless when you have the type of information that we have. It's just trying to focus our efforts in areas that we think we might have the most impact.
Last but not least, these are our email addresses. This is our contact information. Feel free to reach out if you've got any questions to either of us. This is a 25-minute slot, so I can't share a lot of things that we would have wanted to with you.
Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Obviously, student success is key in our lives and in what we do. So please don't hesitate to send your questions. I'm sure you have lots. We'd be taking them if we could in person, but since COVID, you've got our email addresses, so feel free to get in touch with us.
Thanks. Have a good conference.
Enjoy it.